Let's turn now to David Plouffe, former campaign manager for President Obama, who knows about these kinds of situations and knows about these coalitions. David, I mean, I think we just have to face facts. From a strategic perspective, the Democratic Party is a messier thing than the Republican Party. I mean, Donald Trump was getting convicted and all those guys went and dressed like him and stood outside the court. That's not what the Democratic Party is right now. It's got people who have differences.
Right. We're not a cult. I think we're having a healthy discussion. It does need to conclude at some point. But I do think your example in France is important. I believe still today in the battleground states, which is all that matters in a presidential race. That's the windshield we need to all look out. There are enough voters who are part of that anti-Trump coalition. Now, some of those are going to be pro-Biden. Some of those are pro-Democrat. Some are going to be aligned with us simply because they don't want to see a return of Donald Trump. Now, Ali, I think we have to be realistic about where the race is. This time, 4 years ago, Joe Biden led, 3 to 5 points in states and nationally. He's trailing by that and maybe a little bit more. So if the race were held today, and it's not, I think we would lose the White House. We'd probably also lose the Senate and then the House, a Republican trifecta. So we've got time to turn that around because, again, I think there's a majority of voters out there who are enough to win. But I'd like to remind everybody we don't have 120 days. That's not a long time, but, ballots start going out 80, 90 days from now in battleground states. So the debate about whether Joe Biden should be our nominee will continue. I think that, right now, it's clear he has no intention of leaving. And until that changes, he's going to be the nominee. The real question is, if in fact he is the nominee, and I think right now you'd have to argue he's going to be, is how is the race going to change? And I think that has to be prosecuting the case better against Trump for sure. I don't think it's much, yes, his record's important, but elections, I learned, are always about the future. What we have to paint here is Joe Biden's next 4 years versus Donald Trump's. That can be built on the record, Trump's horrible record, Biden's strong record, but that's important. But the chief issue is voters, not just those that are criticizing voters, but rank and file voters have to feel more confident in Biden's fitness. And he's got to really seize every opportunity, because if that number gets better, I think the race gets better. And I think you can then access that anti-Trump coalition that clearly exists out there.
And do you think that conversation is happening the right way right now? The what has to happen to convince voters to be more confident? The reason I ask this is I'm not talking about the debate performance. I'm talking about inflation, right? This administration has done a very good job with getting inflation under control. Wages are increasing ahead of inflation, and yet we see polling numbers that indicate to people that inflation's their biggest problem, and they hold Joe Biden responsible for it. I mean, it's not logical, but it's out there.
Well, listen, I think people are not going to change their view on their paycheck going less far than they would have liked because it's gotten better for a month or two. But the trajectory matters. When Barack Obama won re-election in 2012, he won re-election with a historically high unemployment rate. But voters had a sense that things were getting better. And I think Biden can tap into that. But I think we all have to realize that the reason the debate was so important and why the Biden campaign wanted to have the debate is they were losing heading into that debate. So the problem has become worse. Now, every day matters. The Democratic convention matters. The ads that are being run matters. The next debate on September 10th, assuming that happens, matters. Hopefully, Joe Biden will be out doing town halls with voters and, primetime television programs. There's going to be great interest in how he performs. And if he can, I think, perform a little bit better, both in terms of, how he physically and verbally performs, but also prosecuting that case against Trump, because there is no doubt we know the 2025 agenda that Trump is now trying to run away from it. That's a tell. Donald Trump doesn't run away from many things. He's running away from that, even though
he's all over it. His fingerprints are all over it. His people have written chapters. Right. His name's in it.
Right. Yes. So you got to prosecute that case and say, this is what you're going to get. And by the way, I'm Joe Biden. I care about average people. This is what I've done to fight inflation. We've got a manufacturing boom all over the country. We're going to continue to invest in healthcare. And with Trump, you get the opposite. Tens of millions of people kicked off healthcare. He's going to run away from climate change. Project 2025 in all its awful glory will be the new law of the land. We have a lot of material. And so that's the other thing. Donald Trump is a very weak candidate. He was weak in 16, but won in a black swan event. He lost in 20. He's the reason his party had such a miserable 18 and 22 in part. So this is a guy that can be beat, but he has to be beat. You know, we know that. And that sounds like a silly thing to say, but I think as we all evaluate this question of Biden and then ultimately the question of how we run a campaign going forward, it's not enough to give it a good effort. You have to win the fricking race. And again, I think there's enough voters out there to put this together, but the clock is ticking. And I think the Biden campaign is very strong, great leadership in Jen O'Malley Dillon and others running this. We've got great interest groups who are going to make the case, great members of Congress. Like, I think there's a good supporting cast. But what I've learned in presidential races is it really comes down to the central characters. Now, in Donald Trump, we have a deeply flawed, very beatable Republican nominee. Right now, the Democratic nominee is not performing as we'd like. And if he fixes that, then I think we've got a very good shot to hold on to the White House. But right now, we're behind in this race, and we're behind pretty significantly in the battleground states. And again, that's why we have campaigns. You can change that. But nobody should make a mistake about where we are today.
David, good to see you as always. Thank you for being with us. David Plouffe.
I keep seeing all those stories about I'm being too old. I wasn't too old to create over 15 million new jobs. Too old to put the first black woman on the Supreme Court of the United States of America, sign the most significant gun safety law in 30 years. So let me ask you, what do you think? You think I'm too old to restore Roe v. Wade, the law of the land? You think I'm too old to ban assault weapons again? You think I'm too old to beat Donald Trump?
President Joe Biden firing back at naysayers with a new ad from the campaign trail. It features him speaking at a rally Friday in Madison, Wisconsin, selling his record on health care, climate, gun safety, and more in a critical battleground state. The rally was Biden's fifth campaign trip to Wisconsin, his first since his debate with Donald Trump. And while Democrats at the national level are wondering whether Biden can recover from his performance on debate night in Atlanta, the view from swing state Wisconsin might surprise you. The chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, Ben Wickler, telling reporters last week, quote, he did not believe the dynamic of the race was changed by Biden's performance at the debate when he was often groping for words. A crucial set of voters has reservations about both candidates, Wickler said, and that remains the case, end quote. Joining us now is Ben Wickler, chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. Ben, good to see you again. This is an interesting point. It's an important point because usually there are turning points in campaigns, and there are a lot of people who think the debate was a turning point. And then within about a week, you see the effect that they've had. We've seen this for, campaign after campaign. That didn't really happen here. People are largely locked into where they are. There's been some movement, some of it negative for Joe Biden. In a couple of instances, it looks like there has been no movement. But tell me what you're seeing on the ground.
I appreciate it. It's great to be with you here. And it was a rough debate. And then our volunteers fanned out across Wisconsin, knocked on tens of thousands of doors. And you know what no voters told our volunteers when they were talking to them the weekend right after the debate? Nobody said that Biden seems so old in the debate that I now want doctors to be jailed if they provide abortions. Nobody said Biden seems so old that I think billionaires should pay less taxes so that my prices can be jacked up by special interests. Nobody said that. The stakes in the debate are still what they were before. In fact, they're higher after the Supreme Court decision. And our job, our path to victory in this election is to make the stakes for freedom, for democracy, for working people, the core thing people are voting on in November.
Yeah, so in fact, to the degree that the election is binary, the other side of the binary stays the same. Donald Trump, who this week tried very creatively, last week tried very creatively to say, I don't know what this Project 2025 is, don't know what it's about, don't agree with, don't know what it is, but I don't agree with it, which is typical Donald Trump inconsistency. But that's true. I mean, people vote on abortion, people vote on their finances, people vote on their wages, they vote on inflation, they vote on health care, they vote on a lot of things. And the debate performance didn't change that for a lot of people.
That's right. And when voters watched the debate, Biden was raspy and sometimes he lost track of his sentence, and then he came back and made very clear that he's on the side of working people. Donald Trump was very clearly on the side of himself. And there were voters who hadn't seen Trump in a long time who watched that debate and were shocked when Trump tried to make it sound like Nancy Pelosi had organized January 6th. They knew full well that Donald Trump was the guy who tried to overturn the election and shred our democracy and kick voters in the teeth. So those issues that have motivated Democrats to victory in Wisconsin, in the governor's race in 2022, the Supreme Court race in 2023, those are still right here. And they're right here as the Republicans prepare to come to Wisconsin for their convention next week. We have the Democratic Party has billboards and the sides of buses all over Milwaukee reminding voters about what the stakes are. And the Republican Party really doesn't have a path to run away from the thing that Trump's own team has set out with Project 2025, a blueprint for Trumpian dictatorship.
It's wild. I mean, chapter after chapter is authored by somebody who worked for Donald Trump, including Peter Navarro, who's in jail. That's the trade chapter in Project 2025. That said, I had an interesting conversation with Maxine Waters earlier today, who talks a lot about the things that Joe Biden has achieved that don't feel like a change in the temperature, right? Manufacturing jobs are up. We're building semiconductors in the United States. Infrastructure is being fixed. If you buy insulin, you're capped on how much you'll pay for it. How much of this election should be on Biden's record, which is good, versus the threat of Donald Trump? How do you balance those two things when talking to a voter at their door?
So they're linked in a way that I think is not yet visible to people because the argument is just beginning to be made. What we saw with the Affordable Care Act is that passing it didn't yield political dividends for Democrats, but the Republican threat of taking it away was a disaster. Joe Biden right now has expanded health insurance to millions more people. Donald Trump still wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act and kick tens of millions of people off of their health insurance, remove protections for people with pre-existing conditions. Biden has passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest climate investment. Now there are big projects going up all over the country. Trump wants to repeal it. Trump wants to take away the clean energy incentives that people are using to upgrade their houses and make their lives better and bring their energy costs down. Trump wants to shred the progress that we've made, and people do not like that idea. They don't like things being taken away. And I think this is the job. I mean, Wisconsin elections come down to less than 1 percentage point over and over. We call it the margin of effort. It's about a quarter of Lambeau Field. If you fill that stadium up, you've got 4 of Biden's margin of victory. That means that if someone volunteers at wisdems.org, talks to voters, and lays out what Trump will do to them if he gets in office, and they lay out Biden, you make the case.
That pivots right into the abortion discussion because it's a rights taken away. There are people who voted against taking rights away in some of these states that have had these statewide votes who I don't know what their view on abortion is, but they certainly don't want Handmaid's Tale.
That's exactly right. And the thing that's terrifying is for whatever Trump, insists goes into the national platform of the Republican Party, his own team has put together Project 2025 with its plan for a national abortion ban that doesn't require passing a law. I mean, once you can break the law and have immunity from criminal prosecution, and once you dismantle the machinery of the federal government that's supposed to serve the public and make it personal servants to Donald Trump, you can really start crushing the freedoms that people rely on. That's what Trump is promising. And the special interests who are swarming to his side, they know exactly what he's planning because they wrote the plans. Yep. So the more we get the word out about the stakes, the more voters actually come to us because they don't want their freedoms taken away.
Yeah, we're going to make sure people understand what is actually at stake here. Ben, good to see you as always. Ben Wickler is the chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin.
We therefore reaffirm our support for a human life amendment to the Constitution. And we endorse legislation to make clear that the 14th Amendment's protections apply to unborn children.
We support a human life amendment to the Constitution, and we endorse legislation to make clear that the 14th Amendment's protections apply to unborn children.
There should be a human life amendment to the Constitution to give 14th Amendment protection to unborn children.
In every presidential election since 1984, the Republican Party platform has included a demand for a national ban on abortion. The 14th Amendment says that a state cannot deprive a citizen of his or her life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And Republicans say they want to extend 14th Amendment protections to fetuses and embryos, which would effectively make all abortions illegal. That was part of the party platform all the way up until 2020, when, of course, you'll recall, the Republican Party decided they just wouldn't have a platform that year. Now, this year, the Republican Party platform is back, but this time the quadrennial promise to ban abortion nationwide has changed. Today, Republicans added abortion language to their 2024 platform that reads, quote, "We believe that the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States guarantees that no person can be denied life or liberty without due process, and that the states are therefore free to pass laws protecting those rights." After 51 years, because of us, that power has been given to the states and to a vote of the people, end quote. In other words, forget that thing we've been saying for 40 years about banning all abortions everywhere. We just want to leave it up to the states now. Many, but not all Republicans realize that their decades-long crusade to pass a national abortion ban is a huge political liability for them, and they're now doing everything they can to run away from this issue. But Democrats won't let them. Last week, the Biden campaign unveiled a new $50 million blitz. They're using those new ads to shore up his bid and capitalize on Republicans' single biggest vulnerability this election cycle.
Like a lot of families, we experienced a couple miscarriages. I saw firsthand the treatment I received when I had my miscarriages before and after Roe was overturned. And it is infuriating. Doctors were afraid to give me the care that I needed. What we're seeing here in Louisiana is a direct result of Donald Trump overturning Roe v. Wade. First it was Roe v. Wade, then it was IVF, and next it will be birth control. Donald Trump is going to pass a national abortion ban if he's elected again. This has to stop, and that's why I'm so adamant about supporting President Biden.
In the days since the debate, while the Democratic Party has argued over whether or not to keep Joe Biden at the top of the ticket, voters in Arkansas, Nebraska, and Nevada submitted or verified enough signatures to put abortion access on the ballot in this upcoming election. There are now 11 states where abortion could be on the ballot this year, including battleground states like Florida, Arizona, and Nevada. In every statewide ballot initiative since the fall of Roe, whether brought by supporters or opponents of abortion rights, voters have consistently chosen to protect or expand abortion rights. And the energy behind those ballot measures has helped boost Democratic turnout, or turnout in favor of Democratic candidates. It's a good reminder that while parties may debate who appears at the top of the ticket, elections are decided at the ballot box, state by state.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.